everybody. Happy 2025. My name is Kim C. I teach fiction workshop at the university level, and this is my one-woman podcast, The Year of Underrated Stephen King. I hope January is treating you all well and that you're warm and comfortable because in America it be coast-to-coast chilly, but hopefully the Aussies are having some good beach time for all of us. But today, I am thrilled to present to you an incredible guest to kick off our Constant Reader interview series for 2025. Ooh, good buddies! I'm real excited to share this one with you. Today's Constant Reader interview guest is the author of some pretty stellar titles you might know a thing or two about, such as Horror Store, We Sold Our Souls, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, The Final Girl Support Group, My Best Friend's Exorcism, How to Sell a Haunted House, and the brand new 2025 title, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. This horror author also won the Bram Stoker Award in 2018 for his nonfiction title, Paperbacks from Hell, The Twisted History of 70s and 80s Horror Fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Grady Hendrix has a lot of fans who know a lot about him and his writing, but a part of me feels it my civic duty as a constant reader and Stephen King podcaster to inform you all, whether you're a Grady reader or not yet a Grady reader, you need to know what an impressive Stephen King scholar he is. I don't know if that's been touched upon enough, and today it is my job to set the record straight. I think I'm leaning towards the idea that everything Grady does is pretty impressive, but the great Stephen King reread is real, my good buddies. If you head to GradyHendrix.com, you will learn this author spent 5 years rereading King, as well as extensively analyzing and writing about each completed title. And if that wasn't impressive enough, let me tell you about what a gunslinger this guy is, and he doesn't even know it. Firstly, with all Constant Reader interviews, I always like to send the questions ahead of time so folks can prep and think, make their lists, write down some titles. But when I was about to hit send on the questions to Grady, he said, "No, thank you. I think it will be better and more fun if I just go in blind and answer with whatever is top of mind." Whoa, Nolly, folks. Let me close my mouth that is currently agape. He said no to the prep and preview. It could be the way I was raised or the dusty deserts I grew up in, but that's a real cowboy, my dudes. That's an original gangster. That's some Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, outlaw shiznit, and this Stephen King queen is here for it. Raise up those 6-shooters. Lovies, this interview is so fresh and unique, it makes me so happy. I'm pretty sure every question I asked him, he provided a brand new answer I've never heard before, because Grady has such a rad perspective on all aspects of King's career. I also love his favorite Stephen King villains, the deep love for King's wintry books, and Grady conducted another impossible feat, which I didn't think anyone could do. Mr. Hendrix helped me look at the Tommyknockers with, dare I say, a bit of grace, and maybe someday, not quite there yet today, but maybe someday, a little appreciation. He's a true blue real McCoy and Stephen King miracle worker. I can't wait for you to dive in with this one, buddies. I shall blab no further, because I want you to hear it right flipping now. It is with overflowing delight that I introduce the Year of Underrated Stephen King's first Constant Reader interview of 2025, horror author Grady Hendrix. All right, everyone, it is with great pleasure that I introduce this tremendous guest today, Mr. Grady Hendrix, horror author, Stephen King expert. Welcome to the Year of Underrated Stephen King.
Oh, thank you. I'm always happy to talk some King, so I appreciate you having me.
This is going to be so joyous. For those out there who haven't, of course they've read your amazing novels, But for those who haven't explored your incredibly thorough, great Stephen King reread on your website, it is a treat for constant readers.
Thank you. Yeah, it's 5 years of my life. and I still have books to go. I mean, I think I stopped doing the reread, I think around Bizarre Bad Dreams, and he's written about 10 or 11 books since then.
Which leads me into my first question. On your Stephen King reread, you discuss where it all began for you and this wonderful road you took on the reread. But to remind everybody who might not have had the opportunity to check it out yet, can you let us all know what your very first Stephen King novel was? Stephen King title, I should say. And where are you on the journey currently? About how many titles do you have under your belt?
Oh, you mean the very first one in the reread or the very first one I ever read?
First one ever.
Oh, yeah. So that would probably, I think one of my sisters left Night Shift behind 1 year. And I think that's the one. So I think that's the first one I read. Oh, no, actually, I mean, the first one I read would probably be the Creepshow comic book, actually, because I couldn't see R-rated movies. But if it was text, it was okay because reading is magic. But so I think one of those two, and then right on the heels from that, I got the hardcover of It and the hardcover of Skeleton Crew for Christmas in dueling years. And I know that Salem's Lot came pretty quickly, and Carrie came pretty quickly after that, and Firestarter, and then I sort of was reading everything, and then I stopped around Tommyknockers. I think after Tommyknockers, I kind of, or maybe it was the Dark Half, but right in there is a kid reading. I think it was because, it was easy to take King for granted. I mean, he turns out books so regularly, and it was just easy. And if you read one or two you didn't really love, and I remember not loving Tommyknockers because I was a fool, and the Dark Half, and I just, I was in college, I was kind of pretentious, I was reading a lot of James Joyce and stuff. And so, yeah, so I didn't really come back to King probably until, good Lord, probably around Under the Dome, because I read that to do a recap of the show for Tor.com at the time. And the reread came right out of that. And that was going back to the beginning and reading everything in order for 5 years.
Oh, awesome. I love that. I love that so much. So at present, right now, today, how many King titles would you say you're currently at?
So I think I actually summed it up on the reread. I read 38 of the novels, 15 of the novellas, 111 short stories, and 5 of his poems. The only things I skipped when I did the reread, and actually I did a few more than that since then because I did all the Bachman stuff just sort of for fun. That's now up on the reread. So that's 4. So I guess 38, so 42. And then I skipped, though, the stuff he co-authored with Peter Straub and the Gunslinger books, the Dark Tower books. And the Dark Tower books are weird. Like, secondary world fantasy is not my bag. And I've certainly read the first one, but that's the only one. And the Dark Tower books are really interesting because there's some people who only know those. To them, King is a fantasy writer who also writes horror that they're not interested in. And I'm one of those who just I never did my quest to the Dark Tower. And so when I pick the reread up again, that's like the first thing I'm doing is the books he wrote with Straub and then the Dark Tower books.
I have talked to several who haven't made their journey to the tower yet. I'm in the middle of it, so I can't say.
How's the weather? Are you liking it?
I am.
Okay.
I am having a good time now. I wasn't. The Gunslinger's bumpy, as you know.
Yeah.
And then it's just, okay, Jesus, take the wheel. Like, King, take the wheel. Let's just let go here. And then right around book 3, you're like, okay, we're cooking with gas. I'm into this.
See, I really appreciate that because I think one of the really interesting things with Stephen King, like, a lot of people have opinions about him, of course. I mean, they're allowed to. But one of the things I hear that drives me nuts is people say, oh, this book was too long, or, this book ended and then it kept going. And I always want to say to people, those books are exactly how long Stephen King wants them to be. So if you feel like the book ended and then it kept going, the book's not the book you think it is. He's not saying what you want him to be saying. He's saying something else. And, if you think the book is too long, well, there's a reason it's that long. And to, like you said, Jesus take the wheel. It's like, I do feel like you get a lot more out of them when, instead of projecting the book you want onto them and then being disappointed when King doesn't fit it, you fit yourself to him and you sort of like go where he wants you to go. I hated From a Buick 8 the first time. Not hated. I just thought it was so pointless and all over the place. And then I kind of realized where it came in his career and what was going on. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then I reread it because someone dared me to come on their podcast and talk about it. And I got so much more out of that reread because I wasn't impatient with the book. You know what I mean? I knew where it was going. And I really liked it a lot that time. I'm not quite as kumbaya on Colorado Kid yet, but maybe one day I'll get there.
You're right in that vein. They're bedfellows.
Oh, yeah. Well, I feel like that was a point in his life where he just stopped believing in stories. You know what I mean? Because both books are about the fact that a story can't encompass things and that life is more important than the story. And I think around there is when he wrote On Writing, somewhere around there. And that was when he tells that story about how, moving the desk from the center of the room and all that stuff. And so I really feel like this was a point in his life where writing, he had just kind of lost his faith a little bit in it. And I think he got it back sort of, step by baby step with Sel and Lisi and Du McKee. But by Du McKee, I feel like he was all back. And then just after Sunset. But yeah, anyways, I'm rambling.
Oh no, Mr. Hendrix, it is the most.
Please call me Grady.
I'm sorry, I come from class, and so it's all formal.
No. I appreciate it, but
Grady, I love your perspective so much.
Oh, thanks.
I'm just drooling over here because I really enjoy when constant readers are coming at it from a completely different field I've never heard before, and it's just so refreshing and enriching to hear things like this.
All right.
My third question is kind of in the vein of where you've already jumped to, which is amazing. This question is asking if you have any King titles that you really don't like, but you've noticed everyone loves them. And are there titles that you super love, but you noticed vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. Wait, what is it for you? I'm kind of curious. What's the one you don't love that everyone does, and the one that everyone does that you don't?
Oh gosh. Of course, my brain's like a scrambled egg right now. The one that everyone loves, but I don't really get it, Night Shift.
Oh, wow.
I don't dislike Night Shift.
Yeah.
I like a lot of Night Shift. However, I am someone who likes, from my grad school experience, I like gothic stuff. I like classic stuff. So some of these lean, mean, punchy horror stories, they're very fun. But people just adore Night Shift. They love it, love it, love it. And I'm like, it's fun. It's fine. But I don't think I have as much passion as the super fans.
Yeah, I can see that. And then what's your secret favorite that no one that's like your special flavor?
Oh, this is the best. Okay, this is what I'm ready for. So speaking of hard case crime, I love Joyland.
I can see that, yeah.
I think Joyland is a perfect little book. It is edited to perfection. It is tight. It has all of these wonderful storytelling elements. All of the literary elements are in there. We've got a ton of foreshadowing. We got ghost story, coming of age, love story. It's just this tightly woven, beautiful summer story with a lot of heart, a little bit of spooky. It's just touching, and the craftsmanship behind it impresses me so much. And it's something that I will go out of my way to preach about on the street like a crazy person.
Yeah.
Joyland, you're missing it. Nobody talks about it. Everybody's like, yeah, it's fine. It's okay. I'm like, no, you're not looking deep enough. This is a great story. I get a little crazy with Joyland.
I can see that. Joyland definitely has a great vibe. So for me, the one that I loved as a kid, I just adored, and read over and over again. And when I did the reread, I really didn't like it at all, was Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot was a book and I think probably because I identified with Mark Petrie, it was so cool to have a character who was a nerdy kid and liked horror movies and things like I did. And Ben Mears seems so awesome with his motorcycle, and he writes books and whatever her name is. And King's willingness to kill main characters, all that was just so huge to me. And also the way it follows its story to the end. I mean, there's a lot of genre that kind of gives up at a certain point. It doesn't let everything play out to its logical conclusion. And this really just let it go. It had that epic scope. Rereading as an adult, I was really just taken aback by it. I just don't think the writing's that strong. I think he had a lot of Shirley Jackson in his system he was trying to get out. And I mean, I just will remember there's a scene about like pollen drifting into the sleeping nostrils. And there's also a bit where he's just trying so hard. I mean, I said in the reread, but it's this idea that like it was very Peyton Place in the sense of, oh, look at the drugstore owner. He's got a dark secret. Oh, look at the school teacher. She's got a dark secret. Oh, look at the milkman. He hates milk. Like everything. It was just so, it was almost to me like a little kid's idea of what adults were. They're mean and they have sex. No, what? They cheat on each other. It felt like a lot of straining and groaning, but not much baby, But the one so like you, I'll defend Revival because I bump into a lot of people who don't like it. But for me, it's The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which I think is, like you think about Joyland, I could pretty much say word for word for that book. I think it's one of his, except for Desperation, it's his most religious book. And I think that like, it's just lean, it's really tight, and no one but him could write this. If I submitted this book to my editor, I would get a lot of notes, But he really, really fully inhabits this character. And so stuff that I think in description, like she walks a lot, she's thirsty, in her mind, it becomes this epic vision quest. And he really goes there. It's a book. I don't know if I did recommend it to a first timer, but it's a book that really I have a lot of respect for.
Oh, bless you, sir. I love that answer so much. I adore Tom Gordon. And oh, wow, you've really sort of put a giant log on the fire that needed a log because, oh gosh, that is one of the most underrated King titles.
Yeah.
Wow, it's powerful. And I'm so glad you see that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. It's hard to read it with an open mind and not.
Right. There's so much there. And every time I read it, I get something different. And I always think about the stages of grief in terms of Trisha's journey through the woods.
Oh, yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, there's just like a ton of symbolic stuff going on there. And it feels very female at the same time. And King is such a masculine writer.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, I mean, that's interesting you say that. I mean, I guess he is such a masculine writer, but I think of so many of his books like, Misery or Dolores Claiborne or even Carrie, where he really, and as much as I don't love Rose Madder, I appreciate what he's doing. Certainly in Hearts in Atlantis, it's the female character who kind of, even though she doesn't get much page time, she's sort of the smartest person in the book. So yeah, I don't know if I'd say, yeah, maybe. I mean, I see what you're saying. I totally see what you're saying. I just feel like he's got so many great female characters out there.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I really, really love what King does with females. I think there's a lot of power there for sure.
Yeah.
Tonally, there's a masculine.
Tonally, definitely. I agree.
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, but no, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Style-wise, he's very much, he's a dude who grew up in blue-collar Maine who started out writing for the pulps and for porno magazines. Like,
you got it.
Yeah.
You got it. Dead on. Yeah, you hit it dead on. Like, the roots of this man echo throughout his career. This next question is a fun one.
All
This
right.
is a question asking about your favorite Stephen King villains.
Oh. Hmm. Well, I don't really know if they're the people. So I almost feel like King is terrible with villains in a sense. Like his characters who sort of like, I'm the villain. I never really think they're that great. Like Pennywise is okay, but Annie Wilkes is fantastic. But you get into stuff, you start looking at like, I can't remember his name, but the cop in Rose Matter.
Oh, Norman Daniels.
Yeah, or the Gray Man and Dreamcatcher, or even like I'm trying to think, the John Rainbird. They all feel a little like Halloween masks to me. They're so over the top. But I will say the most chilling monster, bad guy, whatever you want to say, for me in all of King is the Black Blob in The Raft from Skeleton Crew. That story really, I read it young and it really did a number on me. There was something about the hopelessness of it and that they had chances to escape. And so you got kind of, for me especially, I'd get really involved. You should have done this, they could have done this. And you kind of imagine yourself into the story, but it almost gets you high, like how bleak it is. Like they just don't take this seriously until it's too late. And I know that's a really simple setup in horror that's kind of shop worn, but it works. And there's just something about how unreadable and implacable it is. It's always, always, always stuck with me.
That is an awesome answer. Oh, I've never heard that one.
Oh, yeah. And, I was just going to say to your point also, I often find that if Stephen King has a bad guy I like, they're written so well that I like them. You know what I mean? Like I like Annie Wilkes. I feel sorry. Cujo is a good dog, like so I feel sad for the bad guys in his books.
I like that. Yeah. What I love about Misery is when it was written in the 80s, we did not have the mental health conversations that we're having now. So when you read it present day, there's a
Hmm.
lot of sympathy for Annie. We
Yeah.
really understand this lady needs to be on antipsychotics, like this lady needs help. But I believe in the 80s, she was just an irredeemable monster.
Yeah. And I also think fan behavior was, even though it was probably as extreme, it didn't have a platform. There hadn't been that many high profile cases, celebrities being stalked or attacked by fans. Fan culture wasn't, before the internet, fan culture wasn't as easy to look at unless you were in that culture. And so I think now you look at Annie Wilkes and you see her on a continuum, whereas then she was a very unique monster.
Very much so. Yep. This next question is about individual characters.
Okay.
Is there a character in the King universe who you would like to see get their own sequel or prequel or standout? And this is a little bit of a two-part question. For example, Danny Torrance from The Shining, we got Dr. Sleep. We now have Holly Gibney from the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. She's getting her own spotlight. Who would that be for you? Who would you like to see? And then the very greedy double part to this question is,
Yeah.
as an author, I adore your thoughts on Stephen King's Firestarter. This is my question for the novelists. The novel Firestarter ends when Charlie is 9 years old. And if King blessed your endeavor to write the sequel to Firestarter, where would you take Charlie?
Oh, well, it's funny you say that. So I never want to see a sequel. You know what I mean? I always feel like I'm good where they end. But I've always thought that I would love, first off, I'd love to have a different ending for Cujo, not because I'm unhappy with the ending, but it's a good dog.
Yeah.
It's just not his fault. And I also, but the character I want to check in on to just see how they're doing is Charlie from Firestarter. But, the issue is I actually wouldn't want to do a sequel. I think Firestarter would be such a great movie, and I think no one's ever harnessed it because I really do think that she's a phenomenal character. She's 9 years old, which is such a weird age just in general. But I also think, especially for like little girls, like 9 is I think it's an age where a lot of friends of mine who are parents their daughters almost seem to go invisible a little bit. They're around. I'm not saying they're not the fully formed people they'll be when they're 13 or 14, but they're not a cute little kid anymore. But I often notice that that's a big reading age for a lot of them. That's an age where they're sort of on their own making art a lot that I notice. And that's when they sort of seem to be really studying the world. And I think that the book is so much about sex and like sexual awakening. And I feel like most people paint it as if it's a superhero book. And it's like, it's not. This is a horror story about superpowers and about sexual awakening and all these things. And in all of it, she's okay. She's okay. You know, and I think that's the thing parents worry about so much, that their kid isn't going to be okay. And I think there's an instinct to want to protect your kid, to protect them both from the world and protect them from themselves and making mistakes. And I think the thing that's so great about Charlie is all the worst things that can possibly happen to her when she is in her most open and receptive, and she's okay. And so I hate to bad talk anyone, because no one sets out to make a bad movie. But the first movie, it's okay. It doesn't really get your pulse going. And the second movie, I just thought it felt like it was made without a lot of faith. And if there was, no one will make another movie for a long time, but if anyone was going to, man, I want to throw my hat in the ring, because it's a book I go back to again and again. And because it's so satisfying on a plot level, but it's also just everything goes wrong and she's okay. And I think that's so huge. Unlike Carrie, where everything goes wrong and she's not okay.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And I am going to plug the great Stephen King reread like 50 times, but I love your thoughts on Firestarter. I love that perspective.
Well, thank you.
You're right. And it's hidden. It's in there. It's very sort of esoteric in there, but it's there. It's very there.
Yeah. So wait, what's the sequel you want? I'm just kind of curious.
I mull over every now and again. It's a little cliche, but I really just think that, hey, 80s Russia's gonna get her. They're gonna find a way to get her.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I just know the shop has roots in Russia. I feel it. And I just feel that she's gonna be scooped up really soon. Like, she's gonna be in Russia for a while. I know.
Oh.
I want her to go through it a little bit, but it's not going to be, I would like a nice mentor for her in Russia. I would really like it to not be the most traumatic thing. It's going to be cold and desolate, and I think I'm pulling a little bit from La Femme Nikita and stuff like that, where she's got a positive mentor in her life, and so she's got adolescence in Russia. And so that's about as far as my ideas. That's where the stew pot is right now. And then, of course, there's going to be loss, which is going to force her to come home. And so I'm struggling with, okay, well, what do I want her to do when she's home? Do I want her to kind of go the superhero route, or do I want her to be someone who's like, no, I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm going to try to tamp down these powers and just live a normal life, but something pulls her to use them. So, yeah.
I could see this. Yeah, I can see this.
But it's my favorite question, and I'm so glad that you love Charlie.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I probably read Firestarter when I wasn't much older than she was in the book. And, you know, she just really resonated with me as a kid. Like, after Salem's Lot, that was the book I kept going back to when I was younger.
Oh, so good. So good. I love Firestarter and John Rainbird, and so I always really like it when other constant readers have it in a high place.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny when you're saying she gets a mentor in your version, in your headcanon in Russia, because I'm like, you know, in so many ways, John Rainbird is the mentor she needs. You know, like he's the hard where her dad is soft. He's the one who's sort of confronting her with the world where her dad's protecting her from it. It just, you know, he just happens to want to murder her.
You got it. He's really, he channels that evil Captain Ahab for me, where I love that so much. Like, I could just sit on that all day. Like, wow, you are Captain Ahab. You are this intense psychopath, but at the same time, you see Charlie for this rare fire goddess that she is, but you also want to kill her. It's just wild.
Right, yeah.
John Rainbird's a real underrated villain for me.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, as much as I say he's a bit Halloween mask, he goes beyond that. I just find that, like, there's an element of oh, he's, you know, a Native American and he's got this mystical side and he's ugly to a point where he's almost deformed and he works for a secret CIA, you know, offshoot. Just always that comic booky stuff. I still think he's a really well written character, and I think their interactions are so phenomenal in the book because the reader knows who he really is, and so it adds such a charge to them. I just hate all that comic booky stuff, but I totally hear where you're coming. I would agree. He's one of the better villains in King, and that's probably because he's in Firestarter, which I really love.
So we're going to transition to talk about Stephen King on film. I want to know some of your favorites, but in the same vein, you mentioned the latest Firestarter iteration, and I'm with you. It's not very strong. There's a lot of misses. But one thing I was thrilled about was the ending in which Charlie and Rainbird are together. I kind of liked that.
Oh, yeah. I get, you know, yes, I totally get that. That was, at the point I didn't like the movie, so I was kind of like, yes, but that's the one thing they probably did right.
Yeah. This question is asking about your favorite King film adaptation. It could be a TV series. What are your favorites? What do you feel was really, really done well? And what do you go back to time and time again?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of stuff to go back to, it's interesting because I'm pretty basic. I love Creepshow, but I also feel like, you know, Creepshow is really unique as an anthology. Like, it's one director who's a name brand director and one writer who's still alive who writes all of them. And it's just so great. It's so its own thing. You know, Creepshow is one of those things that just always plays. But I got to say, in terms of the movies, I'm pretty basic. I mean, I go back to Carrie and The Shining, and I really go back. And The Dead Zone, I think, is phenomenal. I think Christine, I dislike the book so much that I have a hard time with the movie, even though I think the movie is a really good John Carpenter movie. But I really go back to The Shining again and again and again and again and again. And I know that's so basic. I'm actually doing I do a podcast. And so I finally wrapped up vampires. So I'm starting on haunted houses and I'm starting with The Overlook. So I'm up to my ears in The Shining research right this minute.
Oh, I'm so excited. I loved your episode on Anne Rice.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. I know the next one's Twilight. It's recorded. We're just editing it now. And then we end it there. But, you know, it's funny, The Shining, I just was listening to the audio commentary for it. And it's done by the guy who invented the Steadicam, who did the Steadicam in the movie, and Stanley Kubrick's biographer. And I love the biography this guy wrote, but the number of things he gets wrong about the book really boggled my mind. And it's funny, I'm reading some older reviews of The Shining, and then I was like reading some older reviews of King adaptations like The Dead Zone and Carrie, and all of them have a sentence equivalent to based on like a pulp novel or a trashy thriller by Stephen King. And I'm like, I really, like, you could say that about, listen, I am not going to sit here and try to defend Dreamcatcher, but I'm not sure if out of all of Stephen King's books, The Shining is the one that least feels like pulp, that least feels like trash, like it could be dismissed. And I was just astonished at people being so familiar with the Kubrick movie and so not familiar with its source material. It was really, and you know, it's funny, Diane Johnson, who's the writer of the screenplay, who's a novelist as well, who's written some really fantastic books, she even dunks on it a little. And I'm like, it's so weird to me that Diane Johnson, a novelist herself, doesn't recognize or choose to recognize what he's doing in that book as a novelist. So yeah, so anyways, that was my long-winded thing about The Shining. But I think The Shining book and movie are two different things. I like them both very much. I think they both have flaws, and the flaws are in their authors. But I also think that they're both really, really powerful. And I get why King hates the movie. I get it. I love it, but I get why he hates it.
I feel the same. I like the movie a lot. I really, really like it, but I love the book. Mm-hmm. I'm always like, this is entertaining.
Yeah.
There's a big split down the middle. Okay, so this question is asking about Stephen King settings. The cutesy part of this question is, if you were to magically be transported to work on your next book in a Stephen King setting, where would you choose to do that? Or if that just is not gelling, what would you say are your favorite Stephen King settings?
Oh, well, if I'm going to work on my next book, I'm going to the Overlook Hotel.
Yay!
Like, that's my problem with the book and the movie, but the book more than the movie is it sounds like a dream come true. You know what I mean? Like, you're isolated, it's a snowstorm, it sounds beautiful, you've got all the food you want and nothing but free time. I'm in. Too bad about the evil hotel. In terms of settings, I've got to say that, like, I have a real soft spot. I grew up in South Carolina, so winter was not a big thing. So I've got such a soft spot for King's more wintry books, stuff like Road Work, even though it's a little bit all over the place. I still love the, like, Christmas in Maine kind of thing. I love, love, love anytime it's snowing in the stand. The Dead Zone, I think, is one of his most wintry books, and the Dead Zone is such a vibe to me, the movie and the book. And even though some of his most famous stories happen in summer, like, different seasons, and I think Salem's Lot is at the end of summer, but Carrie's right at the beginning of summer. It, I think, takes place over a summer. I always, to me, King and that sort of bleak Maine winter landscape is my bag.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Very, what's his name? Who am I thinking? Jack London. Very Jack
Oh,
London.
yeah, exactly.
There is something magical about the snow. One of my favorite Stephen King films is Storm of the Century.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, I love that one so much, but I love the winter because I'm a desert girl. So I feel you.
Yeah.
Winter's not a thing, which is probably why I fell in love with someone from Minnesota.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. You talk about winters. Yeah, I almost felt, when I found out that King basically spends most of his time in Florida now, I felt so, like, personally betrayed. And he's like, I don't want to go through another Maine winter. And I'm like, but I want you to go through more Maine winters for me. You owe me.
I need you to feel them to transcribe. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Okay, this question is asking about Stephen King endings. So I know that there are some hot takes over the years. It might have, I feel I haven't heard a lot of chatter on this in the last decade or so. But typically, constant readers are in it for the journey. We are never going to hate an ending. We're just going to look at the story as a whole and appreciate what we can. But has there ever been a Stephen King ending that sullied the journey as a whole for you, where you close the book and you're like, I don't like how I feel right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I've always heard that chestnut that King can't write endings. I think about the ending of The Dead Zone or Cujo or Carrie. I mean, even Salem's Lot, as much as I don't like the book, has a terrific ending. You've got those sort of EC Comics endings that I still think work great, like in Thinner and Pet Cemetery and Firestarter. The ending of it is just absolutely beautiful. Even Tommyknockers, I think, has a great. I mean, I just have never. I don't know what people are talking about when they say this. King, to me, is one of the stronger people to stick the landing. So I just feel like, think about the end of The Mist or any of these, even Cell, which is sort of lifted from The Mist. Like, it just, they all work so well to me.
I'm glad. I agree. And you're in good company.
Okay, good.
A lot of people are like, I don't get it. I don't get why they say these things, aside from people don't want it to end, or they think that it ending in fire is some sort of cop out, but that was like early King career. We don't see that too much anymore. So yeah, you're in good company.
Oh, good.
Hopefully it's something that's dying down.
Well, it's funny, the other chestnut you hear all the time is like, oh, Stephen King needs an editor. Like, his editor can't tell him anything, and he just goes on and on and on. And it's funny, I looked back at a lot of the, when I was doing the reread of it, I read a lot of the reviews, and it was a time when a lot of profiles of King were coming out, and there's a really puritanical streak to it. Because you'd read these reviews and they talked about how it was huge and a sloppy behemoth and awkward and ungainly and all over the place. And then you read these profiles of King that talked about him being fat and huge and sloppy and all over the place. And it's almost like they're kind of like body shaming his book. And it's such a weird thing. And so I always, when people start going on and on about King needs an editor, and all this stuff. I always wonder, like, what's your refrigerator like? You know, like there's just something so America really has a hard time with people who are larger, and you see that in a really weird sort of deflected way, I think, with some of this criticism of King and the size of his books and the way people describe him when you read a lot of his old press coverage. It's so weird to me.
Oh, that is wild. I did not. Wow. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a little bit. That's awesome. This question is asking about Stephen King females, which I know we touched on a little bit, but do you have some favorites? I know you mentioned a few, but are there any that might surprise? Who are your favorite females?
Yeah, let me think. Oh, I know who I really love. What's her name? In The Stand, who's pregnant. She starts out pregnant.
Franny.
Franny, thank you. I was thinking Sue for some reason. I love Franny just because Franny gets so frustrated and so fed up with things. And that whole opening segment where it goes from her telling her boyfriend she's pregnant and them breaking up to her trying to bury, I think it's her mom or her dad, and how frustrated she is. It's such a great chunk of that book. And I love that she and Stu wind up together. Franny just really does it for me. I also have to say, I always think, what's her name? Is it Bobby in Tommyknockers?
Yes, you're right.
Yes, Bobby gets, she gets so hard done by. Like, I really like Bobby. And it's like, she's a working writer and she just wants to, hit her deadlines and write more. And like, horrible things happen to her. So those are two that I really, have always liked. I've always felt that attraction, repulsion for Carrie, which I think is a lot of people feel. And I will say, I so prefer Wendy Torrance in the movie than the Wendy Torrance in the book. Wendy Torrance in the book, to me, feels a little like Donna, I think, in Cujo, the mom. Donna.
Yep.
Yeah. They're very similar to me. I find them both very frustrating. And I think you're meant to find Donna very frustrating, but Wendy in the Shining book feels like a doormat to me. But Shelley Duvall's performance, I think, is so good. And I think that movie would be half of what it is if there had been someone else in that role.
Oh, I love that. That's a hot take. I love that, Grady. That's a good one because usually it's the opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of people think that Shelley's performance is way too overdramatic and they throw a lot of stones.
Look who she's on screen with.
Agree. Yeah.
And it's funny, I just was rereading the Pauline Kael review of The Shining, which is a movie that she doesn't really like a whole lot, but she really singles out Shelley Duvall and says, you get it. When you see Shelley Duvall, you immediately, within a scene, you get it. She says one thing that I think is kind of true. She's like, she feels more like a really concerned and kind nurse than a mother to Danny, but you really get why this woman's with this guy. It's all right there in that performance. I always think Stanley Kubrick, acting was something he couldn't do. And I think he was always kind of fascinated by actors. And I think he was really delighted when his actors went way over the top. And I think it's some of the worst things in his movies. I mean, you look at Peter Sellers' performance as Dr. Strangelove in Dr. Strangelove, or his performance as Quilty in Lolita, or Jack Nicholson in The Shining. And I think, as iconic as those performances are, I kind of think they're the weakest things in the movies. They just get very broad and very cartoony. And that's because I think Kubrick just had this awe a bit of actors and what they could do. And when an actor didn't have to be pushed and actually took the part in his teeth and ran over the hills with it, I think he let them do it because he liked that cartoonishness.
I like that a lot. Yeah, that tracks. That really does work. All right, my guy. So this is sort of the almost done.
Okay.
These are like the fun little, they're bubblegum. You remember when you'd put in the quarter at the grocery store and you get a little prize? I feel like that's what these questions are.
All right.
They're cutesy, but they don't have to stay cutesy, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
This question is asking about a Stephen King character who you might have had romantic attraction for or admiration. Did you ever have a King crush?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, and they're all embarrassing to look back on because a lot of them were when I was a little kid And a lot of his characters were older women who seemed imminently down. Like, they were like, vampires, let's rock. Like, let's go. So I totally had a crush on, is it Sue in Salem's Lot?
Yeah, Susan Norton.
Susan Norton in Salem's Lot. I completely had a crush on Johnny's girlfriend in
Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah. Sorry, it's been a while since I thought about my king crushes.
Oh, you're good.
And I mean, Franny, I had a crush on. I think everyone did. So yeah, those were sort of the big ones that I always, like as a kid, I was like, oh, they seem awesome.
Oh, cute. Those are good lists. I like those. Okay, this is your favorite Stephen King animal or pet or creature. It can be in any of those categories.
I really like, I've obviously said already, Cujo is one of my all-time faves. And I love the blob animal. And whatchamacallit, the ones that I would love to really just sort of like, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot more going on with them than they reveal, is the topiary animals in The Shining. I just feel like, man, those dudes just hang out up there, and like during the off season when no one's watching, they're just kind of rambling around in the snow and having a good time. And as long as no one's messing with them, they're not messing with anyone else. So I always kind of felt like those topiary animals in The Shining were really, they looked like they were having fun.
Oh, great choice. I love that. Kind of creaturey, kind of animally.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, and I also, I don't know why people got so exercised about the myth, because I was like, the idea that this other world would kind of slip through into our world and it was going to replace it. I was like, this other world sounds amazing. Like, it's just like giant tentacle monsters chilling out next to giant spiders. Everything's just sort of hungry and curious. All the animals seem the animals seem legit chill. Like the spider in the drugstore isn't coming over to the supermarket to hunt them. It waits till they come in. The sucker monster, the tentacles that come in the back, they're just exploring, like the bird sucker creatures. They're just attracted by the light. They're all really curious. And I'm like, this must be a cool world on the other side of this. I've always assumed that was the same world as from a Buick 8,
Oh my God, I need a moment with that one. That's such a great connection. I don't know if I've heard that before.
Oh,
That tracks. That works so well.
yeah, I mean, they're the same kind of creatures, basically. I don't know. I always like the idea that there's this whole other world of just kind of like bumbly, like dorky, kind of curious, kind of hungry monsters.
That just delights my soul because I have not heard that one. You got some treasure, Grady. You're giving us treasure.
Oh, and Jory, you were talking about settings a minute ago.
Yeah.
I have to say, one of the most sort of evocative things that really stuck with me from a young age and kind of informs a lot of my life and my writing is the quest to the Micmac cemetery. I think it's Micmac and Pet Cemetery.
Ooh, nice.
The idea that crossing over, like you cross over a natural barrier, but it's also sort of a metaphysical barrier. And you're in the woods, but you're also in a bigger woods at the same time. And then there's a monster there, the Wendigo, that is so huge you can barely see it. And I've always thought, and so for me, it was this idea that they didn't walk into another world. They just walked into a world that was 1 or 2 degrees off center from this one. It's our world, but it's bigger and more symbolic and sort of more monstrous. And that really, a lot of the stuff I write, I really like that space. I mean, in Witchcraft that's coming out in January, I had actually done more with that. There's a little bit of that left in the book, but I really had the woods these girls go into at night were the woods in Pet Cemetery. And so that's something that's really stuck with me a lot. Like, if you think about the Wendigo in that book, what, he's so big you can't see him? Well, someone's going to hear. Why aren't people hearing that? Why aren't people seeing knocked over trees? But we know in our gut that it's real, but it's not that kind of real. And I always think that's an ambiguity that editors don't like in a book. And I often have editors asking, it's a little bit like the God of the Lost in Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Yeah.
It's a bear, but it's also not a bear. And I think a lot of editors would be very uncomfortable with that ambiguity, but I think Stephen King's able to ignore it. And I think that's something you see in The Wendigo, and that's something you see in The God of the Lost. And it's something that I really admire and I try to do from time to time. And I usually wind up having to take it out or clarify it.
Oh, that's so cool. I really am gonna be chewing on these later on. This is
Yeah.
very good stuff. Oh my goodness. Very cool. All right, this is a more violent question.
Oh, yeah.
So the roots of this are from my reaction of reading Under the Dome during COVID for the very first time.
Oh, mm,
Big Jim Rennie is the villain in that.
mhm,
And I have
sure.
never wanted to kill a human more, a king character. I wanted to hurt this man myself. I was becoming a rage-filled monster. And so I wondered if there's anybody out there in the king world who has read a book where you really just wanted to get your hands around somebody, or if you wanted a less messy approach, how would you orchestrate the demise of a king character that you really, really hate?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this question. I don't know if I'd want to organize the demise, but there are two that really do stick out for me. One is and I think King does it so, so, so very well. In Bob, in A Good Marriage from Full Dark, No Stars,
Ooh, yeah.
I found so loathsome and so relatable. I mean, that conversation, and I've never seen the movie, so I don't know how they handle this, but the conversation they have when she discovers he's a serial killer is just is so perfect. It goes from self-pitying to aggrieved to playing on her sympathies, and he's so hideous. And you can see him become remorseful and try to do better and try to be different, and you can see him slipping in that behavior. And so when she takes care of him, I found it so, so incredibly satisfying. And that's the same as in The Body when whatchamacallit, I can't remember what it's like Ace and those guys, the gang in The Body from different seasons, which became the movie Stand By Me. I hated those guys so much. And they just, as a kid, I think you have this real sense of fairness, and they're not fair. And there was something so horrible about it. And the moment where Chris pulls the gun and puts it, I think, in Ace's face was such a fist pump for me the first time I read it. It was such a validation. And, it goes on to become a deeply depressing story. But that moment of standing up to Ace just hit every pleasure center I then had in my 12, 14, 13-year-old brain.
These are amazing. These moments. Oh my God. Right when you were talking about A Good Marriage, I know exactly. For whatever reason, I have this freakishly sharp memory with some King stories. I could not tell you what I did yesterday, Grady, but I could tell you that in A Good Marriage, Bob tells his wife that he got rid of the girls because they were snoots. He uses
Right.
that word, they're snoots. And he saw them laughing and whispering about him, and that's his adolescent whatever. That was the fuel that ignited this murderous serial killer rage. Oh, those are amazing choices.
Well, I was going to say just really quickly, just to digress, you asked about the villain. If there's a villain I want to kill in Stephen King books, I would love to go back in time and keep someone from teaching young Stephen King the word booger. It's I think at this point in human history, he is the only person he uses up the annual supply of booger, that word, in like every year. Like no one else gets a chance to use it. I hate that word. And because when you were saying snoots, I was like, snoot's one of those words like booger or boogery that he uses, but he doesn't overuse. And so when Bob says it in A Good Marriage, it's kind of like this archaic word, but it kind of fits him. And it's like, yeah, like that seems, and it has just the right sort of off-key pitch to it. Booger Man, oh God, there's some books where I would just like make a notch every time he used it. Oh God, I would love to eliminate that word from his vocabulary. But it's him. It's part of what he makes him him.
I love that. I'm going to keep my eyes out on it now. That's awesome. I know that there's one or two. Usually I find I love them all, especially his euphemisms with fuck. I think that he does some really funny ones. My favorites are blue fuck. I don't know why. And then there's one that he says in Hearts in Atlantis. I think it is that direct novella. It's an expression that had me just rolling with laughter, where it was with the character of Rip Rip, who I think was making a lot of noise, and he was just the butt of a lot of jokes. And he spoke out, and somebody said, "Who the fuck asked you to play the piano?" And I had never heard that before.
I've never heard that. That's good.
And I, to this day, like, will think about that line and just like laugh.
That's really good.
Right? So I love that. I love that there are some things that get us, some things that delight us, and Booger, gotcha. Grady and Boogers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, King's the one where I learned an expression I've never been able to use in my life, shit on a stick. And it's always stuck in my head. And I loved it when I read it for the first time. I can't remember which book. And like, never had a chance to use that one.
So good. He's got some diamonds in there for sure. Okay, we are at the tail end here. Let's sort of look over my list.
Let's do it. I can give shorter answers too. So.
Oh, no, not necessary. Right. Okay. Not necessary. So I think I have one or two left.
Yeah, let's do it.
This question is asking your repeat readings. So we know that you did great Stephen King reread. Mm-hmm. So each one of those got a second read. But is there a King book that has gotten more than 2 reads? And what's that experience like? Or what have you noticed as you've aged and you come back to these books as an adult?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I had a desire to read The Stand during the pandemic, but it kind of started before the pandemic. And a friend of mine who runs a used bookstore in Maine found me a copy of the original, which is The Stand, which is one I grew up on, and mailed it to me. And I read it, and until they got to Colorado, I was like so wrapped up in it. And then I kind of put it down to do something else and never felt the need to pick it up. But I had such a burning urge to reread it. Cujo's one I've reread a bunch of times, which I really, every time I go back to it, I'm like, I'm just going to read a little bit of Cujo, and I wind up reading the whole thing. It is one I dip in and out of over the years, and I usually will read a chunk of it, and that's one that, like, I can see the bagginess in it more clearly now, but I also just admire how great it is in terms of writing about childhood. And I'm trying, it's funny, I've reread Misery a few times just because I love what it says about writing, that sort of whole idea of falling through the page and everything, which I really personally, identify with now. But I will say a book that I really dismissed early on, and I came back and I think it's a total cracked masterpiece, is the Tommyknockers. I loathed the Tommyknockers the first time I read it. And I think a lot of people did. And rereading it for the reread, I've gone back and read chunks of it again. I just think, no, it's not perfect. Yes, it's a mess. Yes, it's all over the place. But it is such a snapshot of the inside of his brain at that moment and of what America looked like to him at that moment. I mean, King, I think it was the last book he wrote before the first time he got sober. So you have to assume he was really in the grip of the sweatiest, least pleasant part of an addiction, which is right when you need to quit, where, it's just not getting you high anymore. You're just maintaining. And he had just had a really close friend die, I think of cancer. And the book is just obsessed with radiation and people in the grip of manias, sort of locked away in private in their basements and in their storage units and their attics, maniacally building these inventions that don't do anything except kill them and kill people and generate death. And you just think of King holed up in this, his office, like coked up, high, just creating these books that are almost like bricks in this wall he's building around himself. And then you look at sort of what he was seeing in America in the late 80s, which was a country that had started the 80s with the vision of this bright city on the hill and, morning in America and the good times here, and everyone's going to make so much money, and finish the 80s just driving it all into the ground with the junk bond crisis, crack rising up everywhere. And, in his book, you've got these characters addicted to cheap energy, free energy, finding this energy. And the fact that it gives them basically extraterrestrial cancer and ruins their life, it doesn't matter. They can't help themselves. They're maniacally pursuing these secret goals, like running off a cliff. It's just so beautiful. It's just such a beautiful snapshot of this hellscape that he saw both when he looked out the window and when he looked in the mirror. And I think it's a book that's really grown in my estimation.
Wow. I got to pick my jaw up off the ground.
Sorry, I rant. Sorry, I apologize.
No. Oh my God. No, that was awesome. I loved every word because you really helped me with what you just said, because I am a Tommyknocker hater.
Oh yeah, I get it.
I love Bobby Anderson. I think she's so progressive. I love her and Pete the dog. And then as soon as they lose focus and Guard is our main character, I'm like, this blows. I hate it here. I want to leave. And so that is such a healthy perspective to have when looking at Tommyknockers and looking at this. Wow, everything he's going through, white knuckling, not necessarily sobriety, but like he's at the tail end of
a bad ride.
Bad. You're dead on. And then personal loss, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, or what have you. And it's like, oh, wow, this is a junkyard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the junkyard he drove his career into through the 70s and 80s. And I think one reason it really puts readers off, and I think the reason it put me off so much, is King is a really assured storyteller. I mean, especially, at this point in his career, I don't love the Holly Gibney stuff, but like I can pick that up and I'm just like, he's got me.
Yeah.
Even stuff I don't like that much is written with such an assurance. But going all the way back, as much as Salem's Lot, I think he tries a bit too hard in it to be Shirley Jackson, Carrie or The Stand or The Dead Zone. I mean, these books are just he's such an assured and accomplished storyteller. And I think you put your finger on it, in the Tommyknockers, the minute Bobby is gone, it's like the car we're in just starts to shake itself apart. It's sort of fractured.
Yes.
It's kind of fractures into all these vignettes. And the main character, the dude, he's more like an observer watching it. He doesn't really do anything. Anytime people try to come up with a plan, it just falls apart, or King kind of forgets about it or brushes it off at the last minute. And it ends, I like the ending, but I also get that some people might feel like that's a very arbitrary ending. And as far as endings in King goes, it's probably the most arbitrary. But yeah, it's like the writing itself, his ability to tell a story just starts to crumble almost into these shards. So I think that's what put me off so much.
I'm with you there, but I really enjoy your perspective. That's so healthy.
Oh,
that's really good. My final two questions for Grady. Yeah. I don't know if you possess one of these items at present, but if you had the ability to get only one Stephen King title signed by King, what would that title be for you?
That's funny. I'm not a big book sign person. I actually don't like having signed books. But if I could actually meet him and ask one question, and maybe, while he's signing the book, I think Cujo's such an amazing book. I really do. And I think if Stephen King's name wasn't on it, well, it probably wouldn't have sold. But I also think it would get a lot more respect from sort of the literary fiction crowd. I think it's just so gorgeous. And unfortunately, I feel like people are so obsessed with that comment he made On Writing that he was so drunk when he wrote it, he doesn't remember. And I actually think that comment's bullshit, because King's been very clear over the years that he doesn't drink while he's writing, but he does drink while he's rewriting and editing. And so I don't buy it. And so I've always wanted to ask him, and I'm not sure he'd give me a straight answer. And listen, I've done the same thing. You make a joke or you make a crack or you say something in an interview and it sounds good. And you're like, that's my answer for that now. And I've always just, I'll take it to my grave, but I want to know if there's any truth in that.
I love that. That's so good because, yeah, that is the tried and true. Everybody leans on that.
Yeah.
He doesn't remember writing Cujo, and I haven't read Cujo yet. It's on the list, and I'm so excited to do so, especially now that the You Like It Darker, the brand new collection, has a Cujo kind of a revisit without spoiling
Oh, it
anything.
does? Really? I haven't read that collection yet, so I'm psyched now.
Oh my God, Grady, yes. The short story is called Rattlesnakes.
Okay.
Let's just say there's a Cujo revisit, and that's all I'll say.
Okay, yeah, leave it there. I'm like, yeah, this just moved up to my to be read pile.
Yeah, it is. Oh, you will nerd out. It is very
Okay.
special.
Oh, I'm psyched.
Final question. This is the last question we always ask all constant readers. What are your top 5 Stephen King titles? And why are they on the top 5? They, of course, can be short stories, novella collections, whoever you want to place on the shelf, the 5. Which ones are those for you?
Okay, so I think this is going to be a weird list, so stand by. So I think what I do is whenever someone asks me where they should start with Stephen King, I always say The Mist and The Body. Because I think it's sort of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. One is sort of B-movie monster mash King, but it's done so well. And the other is really, really not what a lot of people expect from King. So that's one entry. Those two novellas, I think, are sort of what I think of as the gateways. And I've reread them both so many times. The second thing on my list, I would have to say, is, and again, I'm doing a twofer here, but the short stories Graveyard Shift and The Raft. Just because those two, the Graveyard Shift, I think may have been the first thing I ever read by King. And, I read Night Shift in order, and I think it was the first thing I read. And Graveyard Shift comes after that Salem's Lot prequel story, which I didn't like at all. And then I read Graveyard Shift, and I was like, yes, please, more. It was just everything as a kid I wanted. It was goopy rats. And again, it's one of those books that The Quest to the Cemetery in Pet Cemetery, well, they're in a basement under the mill, but they're also not in a basement under the mill by the end. There's sort of this endless land, Lovecraftian land of rats. And then The Raft, like I said earlier, it's just so nihilistic, but it left enough room for me as a reader to insert myself. And it became like a trap I couldn't get out of. So those two. Then I would say the next 3, I'm going to take one from each sort of classic King era. So from sort of the land of early King, like those very early years, I think I would really take probably Firestarter. I love Firestarter. We've talked about Firestarter, but I love Firestarter. From the sort of middle, so then there comes like a sort of later period in King where I feel like he really went through the ringer after that accident with the van. And you see him do this a little earlier in his career when he sobers up after Tommyknockers. And the dark half really feels like someone putting, can I still do this? Feeling their way forward. But I feel like he also kind of loses it after the van accident. And you get From a Buick 8 and Colorado Kid, you get Everything's Eventual, which I know the stories are written over time, but I think is his really weak collection, his weakest. Dreamcatcher, which is kind of fun, and then bit by bit, he starts with Cell and then Lisi's story, just sort of putting his feet, kind of finding his footing again. And then he gets to Duma Key. And I think Duma Key is a real great, I would put that definitely for my third or fourth choice, is
Yay!
Just a phenomenal King. And then, we've already talked about Girl Who Loves Tom Gordon Up, but in sort of late period King, I'm going to put Revival, because I think there's some books like Joyland is one. I think Revival's another. I think 11/22/63 is one that only an old guy can write.
Yeah.
And I think Revival, it's such a beautiful book about having a life and getting sober and feeling like maybe I missed my mark and maybe this is good enough. And I can be happy with good enough because I've seen how far you can fall. And then at the very end, he does that thing, which I think is the meanest heel turn in fiction, is he spent all this time on these characters and this feeling of, hey, maybe what we've got is okay. And then he's like, and the universe is an uncaring, eternal hellscape. And you're like, I mean, I reread those last pages over and over again because I could not believe that's where that book ended up. And it was so despairing. And I think to be an old guy who's as obsessed as he was at that point in his career with death, because he really was writing about it a lot. He had a lot of close friends who were passing away, was dedicating books to them and things. And just to say, I'm going to write a book where you see what the afterlife is. And yes, there's an afterlife, and it's worse than you ever could have imagined. Man, only someone who's spent there decades writing horror would be able to make that work.
Such a tremendous perspective. I love your list. Amazing.
Wait, so what are your five?
Oh gosh. Yeah, my five. I'm like, did it change from the last time? I think we still have the same five. So my very first Stephen King title I ever read in my life at the age of 26, post grad school, never read King in my life, not a single word. And I'm fried from my MFA program and I pick up Full Dark, No Stars.
Oh, yeah.
That completely changed my life. I had no idea. Everything I had learned about for the past, 6-7 years in school, this guy did it perfectly, freakishly good, effortlessly. I was just mesmerized by the storytelling. So that turned me into a manic street preacher drooling fan. So Full Dark, No Stars is definitely going to be on the list, followed by Joyland, definitely on there.
Sure.
I also agree with you about Doom McKee. Doom McKee is so extraordinary. I love that novel. I think Revival will be there as well. I really love Revival. It is so dark, but there's such a beautiful story, coming of age and recovery and spirituality and the dark sides of religious faith. And King has this quote where he talks about people of faith have further to fall. And I love that that is explored in this novel, just the fall of losing faith. It's a terrifying, hard thing. And so I love that. And then I think just because I reread it recently, I do think it is such a special book.
Yeah, I agree.
As I grow older, I really enjoy going back to it. And I feel like it gives each time you return to it. And that's very special.
Yeah. Just to sort of say, and I think this is something I'm preaching to the choir here, but we don't really have another writer like Stephen King. He's got a 50-year-long career. He's consistently published throughout that career. And so even if you're just looking at him from a historical point of view, what was America like? What did it look like in 1974? What did it look like in 1994, 2004? He's really there, but he also, writers like, and it's not to slight him, I like these writers, but Haruki Murakami or John Grisham, they do the same thing. They have, and you do the same thing enough times and it becomes your style. But, John Grisham occasionally will write something a little different. He writes legal thrillers. And Haruki Murakami has his themes and his obsessions and his things that he returns to. And King really pushes himself. He's written crime fiction. He's written horror fiction. He's written retrospective stuff. And I just feel like for someone not to be turning out the same book over and over again and to be turning out a book a year for 50 years, there's no one else like him. I can't think of another career like this in a writer who's currently working.
Yeah, I really do believe he is our great American storyteller, at least of our lifetime.
No, I would agree with that 100%.
I'm just so happy. It's such a joy to hear your thoughts. I love your thoughts on King. I adore the great Stephen King reread. Thank you that exists, Grady. It is such a treasure. There's so much research. There's so much care. There's such a cool perspective. It's really punk rock. Like anytime I'm playing around in there, I'm like, ooh, this is so edgy and great. And it makes so much sense.
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
No, thanks for having me. Listen, I can talk about King for hours, so it's always fun to have an excuse.
Me too. I'm with you. Before we head out here, would you like to update any of your fans on what you've got going on the rest of the year and things they can look out for?
Sure. So my website's GradyHendrix.com, and you can find the Stephen King reread on there. Tor redesigned their site, and I added some new stuff to it. So this is everything in order, all the links, you can find it there. But it also, I just posted all my book event dates. And I do more of a one-person show rather than a traditional author event just because it's more fun. So from now until the book tour's over in February, it's like 20 something things I'm doing. So if you want to avoid me, you can find all the places not to go. But everything, and the new book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, comes out on January 14th. So yeah, it's all on GradyHendrix.com. So again, if you don't want to know anything more about me, don't go to GradyHendrix.com.
Oh, thank you so much. I am always talking with friends about your books. So this is a very
Thank you.
surreal, very cool thing. I have another friend who runs a book club, and I'm like, oh, what's your October pick? And they're like, have you heard of Grady Hendrix? This is How to Sell a Haunted House. And I was like, oh my God, I love my life. So
That's so funny.
Such a fun book. I love your stories. I love your authorial voice.
Oh, thank you. It's not nearly as nasal as my actual voice.
It's okay. I feel like I sound like I'm 8 years old all the time. I'm with you. All right, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's fun to talk King also with someone who knows what they're talking about. So thank you for this.
Oh, that means a lot. That was one of the big things when I wanted to do a Stephen King podcast. I'm like, I gotta get my system knowledge. I gotta know what's up. I gotta plug in here. So I'm glad that it works.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Many thanks to Mr. Grady Hendrix for being our first constant reader interview of 2025. What a rad guy. Wasn't he so much fun? But more importantly, could you tell I was nervous on that one? Hopefully not, but sadly, Mama was a sweatin'. Not sure why, but it happens sometimes. I mean, what can I say? Grady is too cool for school. And I couldn't be more grateful for such a lovely hour of conversation with not only an incredible fiction author, but a really smart cookie on the writing of Stephen King. Now, at this point in time, you all heard the man. Go on and get your hind parts to GradyHendrix.com to not only dive into the incredible writing that is the great Stephen King reread, but also listen to his super fun podcast, Super Scary Haunted Homeschool. It's a blast, you guys. It's so much fun. It will make you smile. So well done. Please give it a listen. And most importantly, start your 2025 off right by getting your hands on Grady's brand new novel, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, that was just released this month, January 2025. I took a quick break from my Rose Matter reread to see how quickly Grady could grab me, and it was instantaneous, my friends. I love how Grady starts a story, and I can't wait to have a little bit of breathing room in my schedule to cozy up with Grady's latest, and I hope you all do the same. All right, dear ones, I shall take my exit, but before I go, a few updates. Everyone, the great work is finished. I have completed The Stand, the 1990 uncut version, for the first time. I've done it. It's done. And friends, my heart is still recovering. I've cried, I've recried, I've reread passages, I've book clubbed it, and right now I'm organizing my notes and positioning my pieces to make an episode on The Stand because I must. It's so important. What an incredible reading journey I've had. What an incredible reading journey so many have had before me. And now that it's over, I find myself staring off into space more often than not and going on much longer walks than I originally planned just to unpack and process all of this emotion. I did it. I'm very proud. I feel nourished and depleted simultaneously, which is really weird. But a Stand episode, in some shape or form, is coming because I've got to. I must. It might be the most important episode I ever do. And I probably shouldn't say that because I'm going to psych myself out, but I feel the immense power and grandeur, and I am personally propelled to talk about it for myself. For me. For all of you, of course, but also for me. It's still heavy over here, folks. Stay tuned for that. Also, some fun news to report. In case you weren't aware, last April I started my own Patreon called The Dance Macabre with Kim C, where I plug in shorter, sweeter episodes that prioritize Stephen King short fiction, the women of Stephen King, and anything additional that bubbles up on the constant reader surface, such as new King titles, Stephen King on film, etc. It is a lovely little clubhouse that is an extension of this podcast, The Year of Underrated Stephen King. If at any time in 2024 you visited the Patreon homepage, took a look at the pricing and thought, nay, that's a bit too much on the old pocketbook, you're in luck. I've lowered my prices. What was once a monthly amount of $555 is now $222. So please scoop up this really awesome deal, and heck, I'm thinking about lowering it again in the future, because that's just how I roll. So it would be great to have you plug into the stellar community that's presently with me and explore the 2024 coverage that is ready for your listening pleasure. Quick side story, when I was 20-something, maybe 22, I just finished undergrad and I was in the south of Spain being a little party girl, and it was August, and if you've ever been to Spain in August, you know everyone is on holiday and all the shops have end of the summer sales. So all the windows have handwritten signs with these bright colorful letters that say rebajas, R-E-B-A-J-A-S, meaning low prices. And of course, I was in Barcelona where they speak Catalan, so next to rebajas, it also said rebaixes, which is, I think I'm spelling this right, R-E-B-A-I-X-E-S. Super fun. If I butchered that, please forgive me, anybody from Catalunya, perdóname. Anyways, regarding the Patreon, on the Dance Macabre with Kim C, we got rebajas and rebaixes, and it would be awesome to have you join us. Patreon.com/dancewithkimc, that's dance with an S. Okay, good buddies, that's all for now. I'm working on a stand episode, the Patreon, rereading Rose Madder as a Dark Valentine from my Stephen King Book Club's 2025 theme, which is exploring the Dark Ladies of King. And of course, I'm also glancing in the corner of the room at my bookshelf as it beckons me, Dark Tower 6, Song of Susanna. It's gonna happen sooner rather than later, my dears. Much sooner than you think, I promise. That's all I have for you, sweet people. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate you all, and I hope your 2025 is starting off well. And wherever you are in the world, take care, stay warm, and if you're in Australia, stay cool. I'll talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.